Welcome to the review video on water and the earth. In this video, we're going to review the three objectives that are part of the content assessment for middle school science in the Summit platform, but this is also useful for any student who needs to learn about erosion and weathering in its middle school career. Now, there are three objectives. The first one, we're going to talk about the different kinds of weathering. Then we're going to talk about erosion and deposition. And finally, we're going to talk about the types of erosion and the factors that affect it, as well as the human influence in it. Now, I did this all in more detail in a separate video, one for each objective. So if might not be the right video for you if you haven't learned anything about it, it's more of a review video designed for students which are really close to passing it and just need a little push, a little quicker than the entire play series would be. So the first thing is the types of weathering, and then we have mechanical weathering versus chemical weathering, and that's the main categories you'll see in the test. So physical weathering or mechanical weathering is when water, wind, ice, gravity actually hit rocks and break them down. Chemical weathering, when is there a chemical reaction involved, so rust or water putting chemicals down, which actually reacts with the rock, or acid rain. And in biological weathering, it's a separate category which does not show up in the content assessment and not necessarily not be a category of its own, but it's weathering caused by life, like roots of trees getting through and breaking down the rock, or animals burrowing through, humans digging through a mountain. Though technically those are all kinds of physical weathering too, because it's breaking it down. But there's also biology doing chemical weathering. We have like lichens and bacteria and roots secreting chemicals on the rocks that actually break them down. So, and animals can have urine, which could have corrosive effects. So all of those things could consider chemical weathering. So whether you put them in the categories of physical or chemical weathering, the point is life can also do weathering. Then we talk about erosion versus deposition and how they work together to slowly recycle the materials which are in the continents. They will break mountains and continents down, erode through them, and carry those materials into the ocean. In fact, some people refer to as weathering as the breaking part, erosion as the carrying part, and the deposition as the part of putting it down somewhere, which is usually going to be near the shorelines of continents, especially near river deltas. We'll talk more about that in a second. But anyways, erosion is, generally speaking, the breaking down of the rock into sediments by wind and water or other processes, and then carrying that, where deposition takes over and depositing it somewhere else. Now, the wind can do this on its own, but most of the carrying happens through rivers and streams, which means that material gets deposited near the continental shores. So that's how the Grand Canyon, carved by the Colorado River, slowly actually happened through rainwater erosion, animal erosion, rock slides. It all gets carried down the river, and the river carries it to the ocean. Here you see satellite images of the Amazon basin and delta, where all those sediments are gathered at the ocean because of that massive river carrying all that water from the entire basin into the ocean. The third objective talks about the different types of erosion. The first one is just abrasion, which is rock hitting rock, and rock slides, sand particles being thrown by the wind. Other types of erosion are actually, in other words, the same thing as abrasion. Wind erosion, for example, is when pieces of wind carry materials, or the wind itself hits the rock and carves through it. That's how sand dunes and arches and pillars in deserts, which are far from water, typically form. Water erosion can help this, but if you see a picture like this, it was probably caused by wind erosion, unless it was near a shoreline, which we'll talk about in a second. Water erosion carried by rivers and rain also make massive changes to the surface, including canyons especially. Now, rock slides will also help with this, of course. Wave erosion is caused by the fact that oceans are constantly hitting against the shore, and also longshore currents, which are going to pick up those sediments and carry it to the side, deposit it somewhere else, leading to new beaches or sandbars. Meanwhile, rocky shorelines can be broken down into arches, and then the arches collapse to form pillars. So if you see arches and pillars near the shoreline, it was probably caused by wave erosion. In fact, wave erosion is the primary factor near the beach. Of course, you can still have rain, you can still have life eroding, you can still have other factors, but wave erosion is going to be the main one when it comes to areas near the ocean. It's going to far outshine any other kind of erosion happening in the area. So erosion both makes beaches and destroys them too. You can see the berm pushing, the sand is being pushed by the waves, and then some of that sand is going to be dragged sideways too. So in a way, it's changing that beach, right? And most of the sand from beaches, by the way, comes from the breakdown of the rocky shoreline or from the deposit of rivers nearby and then dragged by currents to the place of where the beach actually is. Glacier erosion is another type of special erosion where entire rivers of frozen ice move slowly as the bottom of the river melts away, either by hitting the ocean or because it's on a mountain and it got low enough that it got hot enough that it starts to melt. And as it melts away, the layers above, heavy, push the other layers forward, and slowly but surely, the entire mountain of ice moves down. And as it does so, picks up large boulders of rocks and carves through the mountains, creating large grooves and scratches in the mountain ranges and carrying massive boulders far from where they came from and put in the middle of nowhere. And then later on, the glacier melts and leaves the boulder exposed and these grooves in the mountains that you see over here. Another type of erosion is animals where they walk around, they burrow, they pee, and in all these kinds of actions will kick up soil, will actually cause changes in the soil, cause landslides, things like that. Ice wedging is when water seeps between the rock and it spins when it freezes, because that's what water does when it freezes, and then pushes the rock apart, cracking it even more. Another thing we talked about is acid rain or chemical erosion, which happens when water, either from rivers or from rain, carries chemicals within it, which are corrosive in nature and break down the rock. Marble is especially susceptible to it, which is why statues in Europe have to be protected inside. Otherwise, they get destroyed, like the picture shows here. And so these were the main kinds of erosion we talked about. But we also talked about how the crucial role that the rivers and streams play in this, because not only do they carve to the surface, through waterfalls and rapids, and literally carving through the plateaus that they're a part of until the waterfalls doesn't exist anymore, pushing backwards on it. So you see Iguazu Falls here. Over time, it will literally recede as it carves through the rock behind it. And they also carry sediments towards the ocean. So they're the main actions of erosion, weathering, and deposition. And at the river deltas that I mentioned before, you'll see a lot of sediments gathered. And that will lead to increase in nutrients, increase in minerals, which will also support life near the shores of continents. All of this is very important for the changes of the earth, both in terms of supporting life and in recycling the materials of the continents. Don't forget that sediments is just another word for tiny particles of rock or even sand that is carried by these bodies of water. The wind can do this too. And in fact, the Sahara Desert sand is picked up by the wind and carried across the world. And it's full of rich in nutrients because it used to be the bottom of an ocean a long, long time ago. And they got uplifted. And so it's full of the dead carcass of organisms that died in the ocean. And so it's full of nutrients that can actually seed ecosystems across the world with nutrients. So that's actually a cool thing that happens. Lots of factors affect the rate at which erosion takes place. Steeper things increase erosion, more water, more erosion, rapid water, more erosion. So floods, bad idea for erosion, right? Well, a good idea if you're trying to cause erosion, but bad idea if you live in a house that's about to be eroded away. If you have plants, that's going to slow down the erosion because they're typically the roots are going to hold the erosion in place. So yes, they crack the soil. Yes, they can produce chemicals that can break down the rock. But for the most part, they will hold the soil in place. So if you take the plants away, it will make erosion worse. With the plants, less erosion. So places like deserts are going to be much more in erosion than places like grasslands or great plains or forests because they have a lot of that. And the type of soil matters too. Finer soil is easier to break down than tough rocks, and rocks are obviously harder to move also. So that also matters. Humans cause erosion in a variety of ways. We do deforestation and wildfires, which take away the plants. And then, of course, that exposes the soil to worse erosions and actually take away all the soil that was the point of you doing the deforestation in the first place. So it's kind of sad that they do that because there's no point, because after the first time it rains, all the soil gets washed away. And the soil wasn't already rich to begin with because rainforest soil tends to be rich only because of the leaves of the trees which are there. So take away the trees and you got nothing. So there's no point. But anyways, they also change the surfaces to asphalt and concrete, which makes water run faster. So when it actually hits the dirt afterwards, it actually hits harder, which causes more erosion. We also change a lot of other things in the world. We carve mountains to mine through them, like strip mining. We actually make tunnels through mountains. We make roads through mountains. We make canals and dams, which change the flow of the river and stop the flow of sediments through them, change the rate at which the rivers flow. All of that affects the erosion. We do plant things which slow down erosion, but we also do a lot of deforestation, which increases it. So in a lot of these ways, humans will cause erosion. And that's it, my friends. That's water in the earth. I hope you found it helpful, and I'll see you next time. Don't do anything that would make your mama proud.